everyone, and welcome to Finding Goldilocks, how to determine which implementation unit is just right for schistosomiasis programs. I have a few house rules just to mention first off. If you could please keep your videos off just to help everyone with their bandwidth. If you could also please stay on mute. But if you could use the chat function, please, during the presentations and after the presentations to stimulate some conversation. I will now hand over to Stella Kefa, from research scientist from the Kenya Medical Research Institute, where she's an infectious disease epidemiologist with a background in laboratory and field research and training in quantitative methods. She works mostly at the moment on helminth infections and works very much with multidisciplinary research teams focused on control and elimination. Thank you very much, Stella. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and good morning, good evening to everyone. Thank you for making time to be with us today as we explore the question, which is the implementation unit that is just right for decision-making for schistosomiasis to enable control programs make treatment decision. Indeed, there is a need to have an optimal sampling approach to assess the impact of schistosomiasis control intervention that have been successfully implemented in many endemic countries. And this is the need that the schistosomiasis oversampling study has been looking into. In this first part of the session, we will have 7 exciting presentations. Firstly, we'll have a live presentation from Rachel Kulan from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who will give a background into the SOS study. Thereafter, we'll have 4 recorded presentations from the PIs of the 4 sites that are part of this study. So we'll have a presentation from Dr. Meiti from the Ministry of Health in Cote d'Ivoire, a presentation from Dr. Pare from the Ministry of Health in Ghana, a presentation from Dr. Traore from the Ministry of Health in Mali, and finally from Dr. Dokeno from the University of Lomé in Togo. And finally, we'll have a presentation, a live presentation from Daniel Gaba from the Swiss TPH, and he will be looking at which is the IU that is just right for schistosomiasis. After that, we will have a short question and answer session that will be led by Fiona and I. And then finally, Fiona will take us to the breakout session. So thank you and enjoy the presentation. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Stella. So next slide, please. I'm going to be kicking off the presentations by introducing SOS, or the Schistosomiasis Oversampling Study, which is a large collaborative project with the goal to evaluate the performance of alternative impact survey designs for schisto decision-making. Before we think about what the best survey design might be for a given implementation unit, though, we first need to consider what our implementation unit should be. And that's what we're going to be tackling today. Next slide, thanks. First, I'd just like to outline this term Goldilocks from our session title. The Goldilocks principle is taken from a European children's tale about a little girl called Goldilocks, here she is on the left, who breaks into the 3 bears' house and, amongst other things, tastes 3 different bowls of porridge. And she finds that she prefers the one that's not too salty and not too sweet, but that she says is just right. So it's a term that captures this concept of just the right amount, or in our case, when we're thinking about implementation units for schisto, just the right size. That is it getting the balance right between accuracy, feasibility, and efficiency? Next slide, please, thanks. Getting this balance right is the problem that we face today. We know that schisto is a focal disease, and we're expecting this to become more pronounced as control programs bring prevalence down most effectively in those easy to tackle places. The map on the left here illustrates a potential variation in prevalence across some IUs. It's just demonstrative, it's not a real setting. And we can see red areas where prevalence is very high and blue areas where prevalence is very low. And for some implementation units, some of these districts shown here, the prevalence is pretty constant across the whole area. But in others, you can see there's large variations in prevalence even within existing implementation units. And next slide, please. 3 ticks, thanks. 1, next slide, thanks. Thank you. So More scale variation in prevalence could potentially lead to communities requiring treatment being missed if they're found in an area with low prevalence, or communities not requiring treatment being targeted if they're found in a high prevalence IU. So smaller, more tailored IUs might be more appropriate, but that might not be operationally feasible if our IUs are just too small. So for an efficient, effective programme, we need to ensure that treatments are being targeted to those that need them, whilst at the same time minimising the logistics and the operational cost. We need to make sure that our implementation units are just right. Next slide, thanks. So returning to SOS, to achieve our goal of evaluating survey designs, we first set about collecting and collating some very high resolution parasitological data across multiple districts in multiple settings, representing lots of different archetypes for both Manson-I and for Haematobium. And you'll soon be hearing from the site PIs in those settings where we purposefully collected data to see some of the preliminary findings from those surveys. We've then fit spatial models to these data to generate high resolution risk maps, which provide us with the most realistic representation of the distribution of schisto prevalence, both within and across these districts after many rounds of control. And it's these risk maps that we can use to simulate or test alternative, more pragmatic and efficient survey designs in each setting. Next slide, thanks. Usefully though, the risk maps also provide us with really detailed and accurate case studies that can help us think through and contrast and compare what might be the most appropriate IU in each setting. And these will be illustrated by Daniel from Swiss TPH a little later. And we're going to be using these case studies to really frame our thinking for the breakout sessions. Next slide, thanks. Over the past year, these detailed parasitological surveys have been conducted across 4 countries in West Africa, so Mali, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana and Togo. And we're also benefiting from detailed data collected as part of Ministry of Health activities, not as part of this study, in at least Ethiopia and Kenya. And although these data won't be presented today, they are going to be used within the general analysis. Next slide, thanks. Next slide, thanks a lot. Before the site leads illustrate their preliminary findings, I'm just going to run through the sampling procedures in a bit more detail, just to demonstrate to you how the data were collected and also to show how standardised the approach was across all 4 countries. So in each country, 3 contiguous districts were chosen, and these were districts where schisto had previously been high, but that had undergone multiple rounds of control and which were considered to really exemplify a given archetype, be that lakeside, transient transmission. And then in each of these districts, the primary sampling units were villages, so that we could compare school attending and non-attending children. To ensure high density of sampling across the whole study area, we sampled between 30 and 50% of villages, and these were selected at random. When teams visited each village, they worked with local leaders to divide them into equal segments of around 50 households, and then selected one of these segments at random. And then, depending on the expected number of resident school-aged children, all or half of the households in that segment were visited, and in each visited household, all school-aged children were invited to take part. Recruited children were asked to provide a urine sample to assess for Haematobium, and in Côte d'Ivoire, a stool sample to assess for Manson-I, because this was the only setting where Manson-I was endemic. We were aiming for around 30 kids per site. This sampling approach that we used, you might be familiar with. Compact segment sampling is commonly used for PC coverage surveys, and it's really useful when an individual level sampling frame such as a census isn't available. It means that we can be confident we have an unbiased estimate of the proportion infected for each cluster, and we can then use this as the basis for our risk maps. So with that very brief intro, I'm now going to hand over to their site PIs who have pre-recorded videos presenting the preliminary results of these surveys. Thank you.
Ma présentation va porter sur l'enquête de suréchantillonnage qui s'est déroulée dans 3 districts sanitaires à forte prévalence. Il s'agit des districts qui avaient donc une prévalence de plus de 50%. Dans le cas de Côte d'Ivoire, il s'agit de Touba, de Waninnu et de Biancouma. Donc, le dernier cité est en cours d'évaluation. Alors, sur le plan démographique, la population des trois districts, la population cumulée des trois districts est estimée à 400 000 habitants pour une superficie de 120 fois 140 km² et pour 62 sous-unités. Alors, la transmission dans ces zones est saisonnière et il faut noter que la température est chaude et Schistosomase mansoni est l'espèce prédominante. Ce sont des districts qui ont bénéficié de 6 cycles de traitement en milieu scolaire et avec une couverture supérieure à 75% lors de chaque cycle de traitement. Et le dernier tour de traitement, n'est-ce pas, s'est déroulé en 2021. Pour la population donc enquêtée, il faut dire que ce sont 3316 donc enfants d'âge scolaire répartis dans 119 communautés qui ont été enquêtées et correspondant à 1686 ménages. Et 42% des ménages bénéficient de l'électricité. 58% des ménages donc utilisent la défécation en plein air et 27% donc utilisent de l'eau potable de surface. Seulement 11% des ménages tirent leurs revenus de la pêche et 53% des ménages pratiquent l'agriculture sur des terres irriguées. 42% des enfants déclarent jouer dans l'eau potable et au pêcher et 58% d'entre eux déclarent donc aller à l'école. À Waninnu, me subdivisé en 11 sous-districts, l'enquête a permis de montrer que, en moyenne, 24%, n'est-ce pas, que la prévalence moyenne, pardon, est de 24% à Waninnu et 59% des sites ont une prévalence de plus de 10%. Et on peut noter que dans 11% des sites, aucun enfant n'est infecté. Et la plage de prévalence par site, donc aussi entre 0 et 100%, et par sous-unité de 4 à 100%. Parmi les personnes testées positives, seulement 16% présentaient des infections de forte intensité. Et la prévalence de schistosoma hématobium est inférieure à 1%. Et la prévalence de toutes les STH est de 3%. En ce qui concerne le district sanitaire de Touba, la prévalence moyenne est de 13% et 34% des sites ont une prévalence de plus de 10%. Et on peut noter que 28%, dans 28% des sites, aucun enfant n'est infecté. La plage de prévalence par site est donc aussi entre 0 et 78% et par sous-unité entre 0 et 49%. Parmi les personnes qui ont été testées positives, 21% présentaient des infections de forte intensité. Et également, la prévalence de schistosoma hématobium est inférieure à 1% et celle de STH est de 3%. Voici là l'économie, n'est-ce pas, des résultats obtenus dans ces deux districts sanitaires que j'ai eu l'honneur de vous présenter. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention. Ma présentation va porter sur l'enquête de...
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Joseph Kojulabi Opare, of the neglected tropical diseases program of the Ghana Health Service. I'm glad to present to you our work on schistosomiasis oversampling. As you can see from the first slide, ladies and gentlemen, the three districts were chosen to represent a setting with large permanent water bodies, areas of subsistence agriculture with little large-scale commercial agriculture, and some fishing. Many communities live around the lake and are only accessible by boat, and major rivers in the area are seasonal. There are between 5 to 10 sub-districts per district. Sites on the map here are shaded by sub-districts, although we don't have maps of the sub-district boundaries. Ladies and gentlemen, the survey included 256 sites and collected urine samples for 8,162 children. We also collected information on key factors linked to schistosomiasis risk, which are summarized here. Overall, around half of households have electricity and only 30% of households have access to latrine. There were a high use of surface water for drinking. Fishing was an important source of income for around a third of the household with a fifth farm on irrigation lands. Ladies and gentlemen, the map on the left, as you can see, shows observed distribution of prevalence across the 256 sites. As you can see, there is a very large variation in prevalence, whilst in nearly 50% of sites, no infections were observed. In 12 of the sites, infection prevalence was still higher than 50%. Notably, close to 50% of observed infections were of high intensity. Infection prevalence is much higher closer to the lake shore and lower as you move further away. This means there is a large gradation in prevalence across districts and also sub-districts, as the district and sub-district boundaries don't contour the lake. Mean prevalence in Panda is just below the 10% intervention threshold when taking an average across the sites. Although communities with prevalence exceeding 50% were still seen. In Kratchi, in Chimuru and Kratchi West, mean prevalence is seen higher and closer to 20%. This result suggests that there are large areas within the district where the majority of communities have zero or very low prevalence, and so blanket treatment across districts would lead to over-treatment. However, in Pandai, where prevalence was just under the threshold, there are high prevalence communities requiring treatment.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I have the honor and the pleasure to share with you a brief summary of results of the oversampling survey in the health district of Bafulabe, Jema, and Usubijenya in Mali. There are 3 districts that was chosen to represent a setting that was predominantly Sahelian, with seasonal rivers and transition water bodies, and focal distribution of schistosomiasis. They are on the Senegal River. On the Senegal River represent a large population and land area. Movement around is hard in the rain season, For the three districts, the estimated population is 650,000 inhabitants. In total, we had 65 sub-districts. There have been a control program for schistosomiasis running for many years, treating annually with praziquantel. The last round of treatment was 2019. Next slide, please. For the three health districts, we have collected data by 7,021 school-age children across 207 communities and 2,610 households. The results shows 41% household have electricity, over 19% household had access to sanitation, 7% household use surface drink water, 17% household earn income from fishing, 31% household farm on irrigated land, 53% children reports playing in water or fishing. School attendance is low at just over 50%. Here we can say that in Jema we had 21 sub-districts. Main prevalence was 41%, 76 sites exceeding 10%. Range prevalence by site was from 0 to 19.6. 70% had heavy intensity of infection. In Usubijanya, we had 19 sub-districts. The main prevalence was 33%, with 71% sites exceeding 10%. The range prevalence was by site from 0 to 100%. 34% had heavy infection, intensity of infection. In Buffalo Bay, we had 25 sub-districts. The main prevalence was 36%, with 73% size exceeding 10%. The range in prevalence by site was from 0 to 100%. 47% had a heavy infection, and 56% had microhematuria. Thank you for your.
Hello, everyone. I have a pleasure to share with you the preliminary result of the survey conducted in Togo. Next, please. In Togo, 3 districts of the Plateau region in the central west of the country were the site of this study, with an estimated population of 450,000 inhabitants, the total number of the sub-districts in the 3 selected districts was 44. As a reminder, in Togo, based on the mapping results, integrating community-based MDA against schistosomiasis, STH, and onchocerciasis was launched in 15 districts in 2010 and in 2011, the MDA is nationwide. That is a door-to-door whereby school-age children will treat it with praziquantel as per the sub-district prevalence. In higher prevalence sub-district, adults were also treated, and the last round is done in 2021 before the present assessment. For this study, it is the archetype with seasonal transmission was considered. During this evaluation, conducted in 217 villages within 30 days, more than 6,000 school-age children across 3,000 households were surveyed. Regarding wash issue also documented during this study, we note that 94% of households declare have open defecation. 72% of them are farmer in irrigated area, and 60% of children playing on fishing in ponds and rivers. Next, please. Regarding the schistoprevalence found, some notable variation were noted between districts, within the districts and sub-districts, especially in areas with high prevalence. In the district of Est Mono, the average prevalence was 2%. 73% of the school-age children tested were negative. Range prevalence by site is 0 to 43%, and 44% of those children testing positive have a heavy intensity. In Anier district, with 12 sub-districts surveyed, the average prevalence was 7%. 49% of school-age children were not infected. Range prevalence by seat goes from 0 to 70%. 45% of positive cases have heavy intensity. Ogu, with 40 sub-districts and 118 villages surveyed, seems to be the most affected district with a mean prevalence of 26%. Only 22% of school-age children tested were not infected. The range in prevalence by village survey was 0 to 100%, and 49% have a severe intensity of the infection. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, everybody. So this is the presentation, which is the implementation unit, which is just right for schistosomiasis programs. Next slide, please. And next. Can you go? Yeah. So I split the question into two sub-questions. First of all, what is the right kind of implementation unit? And next, please, what is the right size of implementation units? I will elaborate on that in what follows. Next, please. So what I mean by right kind of implementation unit? Well, if we think about classical implementation units, we would think about administrative and health units. And this makes a lot of sense because the administrative structures are already in place to distribute, for example, treatments and so on. However, administrative and health units may not 100% be most useful to capture risk patterns. And it can be that within one administrative unit, you have high and low prevalence at the same time. So we thought maybe it's also worth to check if it would be feasible or implementable to have implementations units which are based on a risk factor, for example, proximity to the nearest water body, rather than administrative structures that are already in place. So this is one arm of the question, and the other sub-question, next please, is which size of implementation unit would be the most, the best one to make the best treatment decisions? Is it going to be treatment decisions at district level, at sub-district level, even smaller levels, or do we really need to go to schools and communities, which would be, of course, very expensive? So in the following, I will present 3 of the 4 case studies that we have analyzed yet. They were to you already presented by Dr. Opare, Dr. Dorkino, and Dr. Traore just before, and it's the case studies of Togo, Ghana, and Mali, and we will see these questions illustrated in there. Next, please. So previously you have seen the point prevalence estimates as collected in the field. Now what we have done is to use climatic, environmental, wash, and behavior-related variables to model the prevalence with a statistical model. And this is the predicted prevalence surface that came out of this modeling process. And for now, we assume that this is the true distribution, the true geographic distribution of the prevalence of schistosomiasis here in this area of Togo in this case. So this is, of course, a peek behind the curtain. Normally, before you plan to do a study and you try to choose which implementation unit you want, you never know this detailed distribution of the prevalence beforehand. But it's useful to look at this. So here in the picture, you see the districts. You have 3 districts. If you would need to assign a treatment for the top district, it would be very easy. You would say, okay, we have a very low prevalence. You don't need to treat this district probably. In the other 2 districts, however, we have areas of high and low prevalence in the same time. So whatever your decision is on treatment or not, if you choose district as implementation unit, you would still commit some error for some communities which are, for example, do not need treatment and will be treated, or the other way around. If we would go to the next smaller implementation unit, in this case, the sub-district, can you hit next, please? You see that on the right-hand side here. You can see that for the top part of the map, the treatment decision would still be the same, probably no treatment for all these sub-districts there. Also in the very high, so these sub-districts with very high prevalence, you could just assign treatment there and it would be a correct decision. However, there are still some sub-districts which are not easy to decide on. Overall, accounted here, there would be about 50% of good decisions or like easy decisions to make compared to the district's level. So it would be giving better and less faulty decision if we would go to a smaller implementation unit, of course, at the cost that it would be more expensive and more effort to do so. Next, please. Now let's look at the special case, the situation in Ghana. As Dr. Traore has already explained, Lake Volta surrounds all of these 3 districts. And so all of the 3 districts have at the same time a high and a low prevalence area. So it is really not easy to decide in this case what would be a good treatment strategy to treat the whole district or to not treat the whole district. Next, please. Now, in this case, unfortunately, the shapes of the administrative sub-districts that are already in place is such that all of them also border the Lake of Volta, so all or virtually all of the subdistricts have also a high and a low prevalence area within them at the same time. So even going to the subdistrict level in this case would not really improve our treatment decisions, because we would still commit really an error if we would assign the whole subdistrict the same treatment. So there's only, I think, 2 subdistricts here which are having a good and easy treatment decision in the center, in the north, as you can see. So in this case, we thought we would maybe look at how we could segment this space into risk areas. Next, please. And this is what you can see here on the right. These are borders such that that delineate areas which are closer than 3 kilometers to the next water body and further away. And if we look at the areas that are further away than 3 kilometers, you can see that they are mostly green, and it would be easy to allocate them no treatment, while in the other regions it would be more challenging, but still you could mostly assign them treatment and be correct for most of the areas. Next, please. Turning to our last case study in Mali that I present today, also schistosoma hematobium. This is now an entirely different situation. We have a very high prevalence across all the 3 districts here, as Dr. Traore has explained before. It would be easy in this case to assign treatment for all the 3 districts, or the only case where you would make some misclassification would be in the very bottom district, where you see there's a small part in the south that has low prevalence of schistosomiasis. Next, please. Thank you. Exactly. And here, even if we would go to the sub-district at this level, we would also make a bit less mistake, but only the difference would be rather minor. And since the prevalence is really in the 20 to 50+%, it would be probably more advisable and cheaper to just treat everybody. Then one other thing that I would like to stress here is Mali, as you all know, is a very big country, and here we have a district average size of a bit more than 10,000 square kilometers, while as in Ghana, for example, a district would be 1,000 square kilometers, and also the sub-districts here are way bigger than in Ghana, for example. On the other hand, if we look at the sub-district here, we have only a median found about 8 communities per sub-district, while in Ghana there are in the median about 45 villages per sub-district. So this means that if we would go to the sub-district level in Mali, this would probably imply that in some sub-districts there would be very few villages, and we would really need to go almost to all villages to have an estimate of the prevalence there. Okay, so much to sparse population. Next, please. Now, let me summarize, please. Hit 2 times next. Yes, okay. So first, you have seen that usually going to smaller implementation units improves the accuracy of treatment decisions. So it's generally a good thing, especially if we are in an elimination case and just have some local hotspots. Then we have seen that 2 small implementation units imply sampling all communities or schools. That was the case of Mali, where there's only few communities or schools per sub-district, for example. This would be expensive or unfeasible, and it's also not necessary. Then the implementation unit as risk areas are only preferable if feasible, and we want to hear your feedback on that in the breakout session too, if a risk factor is known. And the only scenario here where we could see this clear risk factor was in the Lake of Volta, where we really had the high prevalence across, close to the shore of the lake, and low prevalence everywhere else. In Togo and in Mali, we could not identify such a risk factor. Next, please. And next again. So the last 2 points are that we have seen also that the administrative or health units that are in place vary a lot in size and population density, and this needs to be taken into account while looking at sampling designs and implementation units. Finally, the choice of the implementation unit should be based on the local knowledge, and if any exists data that was already collected before that shows the level and distribution of the prevalence. Now, we have, of course, here shown maps that are, as I said, a bit a peek behind the curtain. Usually we don't know how the distribution of the prevalence is, and this is why really it would be best to rely on data that was previously collected or new surveys. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our speakers for such clear presentations. We only have time for 1 or 2 questions. Dr. Traore, there's a question for you on the chat from Anne Phillips. She says prevalence is so high in Mali despite so many rounds of MDA. Is it an insecure area that they've had challenges with coverage? Dr. Traore?
Stella?
There's a question for you.
Yeah, the prevalence is so high in Mali despite so many rounds of MDA.
Mm-hmm.
So is it an insecure area? It's not an insecure area.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an insecure area.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the treatment is not very good conducted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so in these areas, but it's not in insecure area.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Traore. Any other question? We have room for just one.
So I want to ask Daniel about something.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel.
Yes.
Also, können Sie mir also mehr erklären, also in French oder in Deutsch, was Sie gesagt haben?
De manière générale, toute la présentation.
Pas tout de suite, après on va se prendre en off.
Ouais, ça marche, ouais.
Ok?
Bien sûr, ouais. Mm-hmm.
Ok, merci beaucoup.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll hand it over to Fiona.
Thanks, Stella, and thanks for a bit of German in the meeting there, Dr. Traore and Daniel. So we're going to split out into the breakout rooms now. There's been some assignments already. We're going to have group 1 is the Kodzo with Katie Gass, group 2, Kuchocho with Rachel Pullen, group 3, Bilharzia with myself, and group 4 will be the French-speaking group, which is Ngwene Bileni. It's the Malian for red urine for schistosomiasis. So we'll split into those groups now, and then we'll come back around 10-15 minutes before the end of the session to hear about those groups. Thanks very much. All back now, or we're all coming? I see the numbers going up. We're getting back there. I think we're maybe all back now. And I am going to ask each of the group facilitators to just give some quick highlights from their group, starting with group 1, which is Katie, please. Katie Gass.
All right, I'll make my summary and invite my collaborators to chime in. I think maybe one key overarching question that kicked us off is we need to make sure that we're clear on the aim of the program. Is it control or elimination? Because that will drive a lot of the decision making. And in terms of use of non-administrative areas for treatment, we discussed the challenges presented by logistics and coordination, everything from the reporting forms and the drug requests to coordination between district level managers, if it spans administrative areas. Also the practical concern of financing. How are the funds distributed and can that work if you're using risk-based admin areas? And then this feeds into the OR questions. How do we determine the extent of the risk? How far out from your water body, for example, does one need to include in a given area? And some work has been done around Lake Victoria, but this schisto oversampling study can help feed into that body of evidence. And then we also talked about the need that it would be more practical if the maps focused on the probability that an area is above the threshold for action. So in this case, a 10% prevalence, rather than having a nice smooth surface predicting the prevalence, really knowing whether or not the area should be treated or not may help clarify some of these questions about the administrative unit for treating. And then in terms of operational research questions, when is it appropriate to reevaluate the prevalence and maybe see if you should shift your treatment strategy? After how many rounds should that occur? What level of certainty is needed around your predictive prevalence to make a treatment decision? And then how would these non-administrative areas, if we're going to do some risk-based treatment, how would that map to other NTDs? Are the high-risk areas shared across NTDs? And just also, how can we help NTD programs collaborate with other sectors, recognizing that often the NTD programs may not have the most up-to-date information or access to all the different relevant maps that some other sectors may have, but that we often work in silos. And so that's a practical challenge that needs to be thought through. Group, anything else I've missed? All right, I'm seeing head nods. We can go on, Fiona.
Okay, grand. Thanks, Katie. I'll now pass it over to Rachel's group, which will put you, I believe.
Hello, thank you. Yes, sorry, just bringing back up my easy retro board. Yeah, just to thank everyone in my group. We discussed some similar things and also touched on some other areas. One of the things we spent quite a while chatting about was this relationship between the epidemiology and how we expect prevalence to vary and implementation units, to discuss whether it was even possible to really establish these kind of non-administrative unit level borders without very detailed data. And so whether you can even say in advance whether you want to implement using a non-administrative unit level. And we discussed the feasibility of delivering at non-administrative unit levels, saying that this really does, as Katie's group said, requires buy-in of higher administrative levels, and that the management of that could be really pretty complex. And so the reporting burden and the oversight burden could be very high. Then we spent quite a bit of time discussing the kind of different levels, and particularly one thing I want to flag up was the implications for integration with other NTDs, because not only do we need to think about integrated MDA and giving praziquantel out as part of other programs, but also the practicality of combining surveys. And so if we have different implementation unit areas, that adds a kind of real complexity to how we think through integrated delivery and surveys, and the kind of trade-off between that and ensuring standardization across our diseases, with also the real need to make sure we make really clever use of the praziquantel that we have available, particularly given those changing guidelines. And then there are a lot of operational research questions were raised, but we didn't really have time to get into discussing that, but particularly looking at how do we make some of these tools, such as developing geostatistical risk maps, how do we make those tools and analysis methods more available, which I think is really important. how realistic is it they can be made more kind of user friendly. And so I don't know if I have missed anything. I can't see everyone else. I can see my other group there. Have I missed anything? Please do speak up if I missed your points. Thanks, Yael. Brilliant. Okay, so I will pass over.
Great, thanks. And I'll ask Daniel to summarize his group now. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. So we also had a very good discussion, although we were almost only, I think, 8 people or so, but we still had a good discussion. Some points have already been mentioned by the two of you. Maybe I just need to add, we had spent some time discussing how would one determine the proximity to water, because there are water bodies that are the big water bodies, but what might be important also are small water bodies. How should one treat small rivers, streams, etc.? Does it matter how fast these things are flowing? And this would all play into the making of these risk-based treatment implementation units. So this would not be so easy. Then another mention that was also there was that it would be preferred to just stick to the traditional health units, because this would also allow for an integrated treatment with the other programs, of course, to fight, I don't know, soil-transmitted helminth and so on. So just the distribution would be easier in this case, to go all in the same, with the same structures which are in place. Then I think that was mainly it. Maybe I forgot something. Maybe my group, if you want to add something, please speak up. But yeah, I think that was the main points. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And then our group, let's bring multiple things on the screen at one time. I won't go over what we discussed in terms of the admin or implementing at a non-admin level, because I think most of those points have been brought up. But something in terms of looking at the different implementation units, whether a district level is appropriate, whether a sub-district level or whether community level is appropriate. We had a lot of discussion around that, and just reflecting back on the data that were presented within the session, was that actually, a district level where you don't have a lot of heterogeneity, like the Mali example, then a district level is probably and a sort of efficient way to move forward with implementation. But as we've seen in the other countries where there is more of a difference within districts, then the sub-district implementation units is more appropriate. But and it was felt by the Ministry of Health partners that were in the group that is a very feasible way of going forward. But they did also highlight, as did others in the group, that water and sanitation access factors need to be taken into account during this, and we sort of discussed the use of secondary data. It was also sort of felt that smaller units are actually easier to implement at, especially with communities understanding a bit more about what the risk factor is. They might not understand what the risk factors are, or what their chances of schistosomiasis are within a whole district, but they'd know it more in their local setting, and therefore it might actually improve compliance and coverage if these treatment strategies were directed at smaller units. And then when you get to a very low prevalence, where you only have a few sites where there is prevalence, then again it was felt that other risk factors needed to be taken into account, and obviously the test and treat approach, or the test, treat, and track approach, all sort of approaches which are currently being tested in terms of what's the best way to do them, what will work, and hopefully we'll see those models piloted in further places and scaled up. But what other sort of innovative approaches, and how can capacity be built within existing health systems to do surveillance and to do sort of test and treat approaches? And we discussed what role in that kind of situation citizen science might be able to play a role in highlighting where there's snails, where there's seasonal water bodies, etc. So they were some of the main points that we highlighted, and people were busy working on operational research questions that still need to be answered, and we didn't get to discuss those. I'm not going to discuss them now, but they will be collated as part of the report of this session, so they will certainly be going into next steps. I just wanted to take the last few minutes just to give an update on where what the next stages for the schistosomiasis oversampling study are. As you saw today, a lot of data have been collected in Western Africa on schistosoma hematobium, and then we're working with ministries of health in Eastern and Southern Africa to collate more data on schistosoma mannsoni. These data are then being used in geostatistical models to look at the prevalent surfaces, as Rachel mentioned. We're going to be looking at different survey designs, and we're going to be presenting those at the end of the month to various partners, including the World Health Organization, but very much in collaboration with the principal investigators of SOS. And really sort of trying to understand, well, what would be the most feasible survey designs. And we'll really take into account a lot of input from today's session, very valuable. We're then hoping next year, maybe even early next year, there will be a communication about what survey designs and what considerations need to be taken into place for impact assessments for schistosomiasis. I want to thank you all for joining. I want to thank all the speakers for today, all the principal investigators for their work, and all of you for your input in this session, which is really adding to the conversation and gives us a lot more to take forward. So thank you very much, and have good afternoons, evenings, and the rest of your mornings. Thank you.